Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, and welcome to the first webinar of the 2024 FIDIC webinar series, brought to you by the Business Practice Leadership Committee, also known as the BPLC. I am Prashant Kapura, member of the FIDIC board and the primary board liaison of the BPLC. FIDIC is grateful to Bentley Systems, who are our sponsors for this event. Bentley Systems are an infrastructure engineering software company providing a gambit of software solutions globally, and we would like to thank them for their support of this and the previous FIDIC webinars. The BPLC is a working committee of FIDIC appointed by the FIDIC board. All our committees have functions which tie into the FIDIC strategic plan, and some of the primary functions of this committee are to promote the adoption of best business practices throughout the global consulting engineering industry, monitor, guide, and advocate best business practice across the global consulting, engineering, and construction industry, and last but certainly not the least, provide guidance and advocate for fair competition, consultant and contractor selection, procurement, and appropriate risk allocation. And in line with these functions, I'm pleased to present today our webinar titled, Where is Procurement Going? Future Trends and Challenges for the Industry. We shall hear from an eminent lineup of speakers who will present a toolkit that has been developed in collaboration with MDBs, how procurement process is a risk management tool for clients and the consulting engineering industry, discuss the fairness aspect of procurement, and lastly, discuss the future for procurement and what the clients should do and should not do. It is now my absolute pleasure and privilege to hand over the proceedings to the chair of the BPLC, Manuel Pérez Sierra, Managing Director, WSP, Spain and Portugal.
Thank you, and welcome to everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Where is the Procurement Going? Future Trends and Challenges for the Industry, organized by the FIDIC Business Practice Leadership Committee and sponsored by Bentley Systems. During the next 90 minutes, we will look at the all-important area of procurement, exploring the latest development and trends, and looking at how procurement should evolve to deliver better and more sustainable infrastructure projects. Procurement processes are crucial to ensuring that governments, funders, and organizations obtain the best possible services or products according to their needs and budgets. According to several studies, engineer and construction services scores low on procurement practices compared with other industries. Procurement systems applied to our industry usually face several problems that affect their efficiency and effectiveness. Some of those challenges are currently lack of clarity and accuracy in requirements, bureaucracy on slow processes, limited competition and potential favoritism, lack of transparency, inadequate proposal evaluation, limited capacities of the selection team, resistance to change and innovation, ineffective risk management, lack of post-contracting follow-up, or even dependency on low prices. In addition to all that topics, engineering and construction industry has a major role to play in achieving global sustainability goals, and those topics should be, without any doubt, part of the future procurement processes. Addressing all those issues requires a comprehensive approach that includes improving the procurement processes of the organizations, training those who are involved, adopting technologies that facilitate transparency and efficiency, and commitment to continuous evaluation of the selection systems. Our four speakers will touch in the next minutes some key topics and ideas to support that improvement. Only at a very high level, we will talk about how to take in consideration the value added in the process, how manage and reach fair evaluation of quality, scope of pricing, how integrate the ESG or social value in the process, how avoid the buying cheaper philosophy, how align the client strategy with the supplier, or how create value from the procurement process. These will be the topics that any of our speakers will talk about. As previously to the introduction of them, we will have one pool question that I would like to share with all of you. The question is, how would you rate your experience of client procurement of consultancy services? The four answers that you can do is A, very good, good, satisfactory, poor, or very poor. Thank you to all of you for your answers. And now, without more delay, let me start introducing your, here you can have the answers. It seems like most of you have a satisfactory experience, which is good. And I said, let me start introducing our first speaker today. It's a great pleasure to have Ines Ferguson with us. Ines is the Global Business Development Director of TYPSA, a consulting engineer firm with more than 3,500 staff working in 43 countries. And currently she's the president of the EFCA, the European Federation of Consulting Engineers. She has worked most of her career in tenders and project finance by international donors and multilateral financial institutions, and she has an extensive knowledge of the procurement procedures and standards related to consulting services contracts. She will talk today about Sustainable Procurement Toolkit, a toolkit that has been developed with multinational development banks. Welcome, Ines. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Manuel, for the introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you today. And I wanted to start by reflecting on the highly ambitious goals we set back in 2015 with the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and the Paris Agreement, and reflect on how these commitments have actually shaped important economic recovery packages following the COVID pandemic, and are defining the investment decisions worldwide. Of course, MDBs are fully aligned with these agendas, and in regions like in Europe, they're actually the backbone of our policy, and they are resulting in the global gateways, strategies, or even the Green Deal. So the progress that has been made on an institutional and a financial level is remarkable. But we are now faced with the challenge of implementation, of the delivery of sustainable projects, particularly in infrastructure. And we need to turn these very ambitious goals into specific and measurable criteria that engineers can use on the ground. And obviously, procurement has a very strategic role to play in that regard. So we have guidelines, we have some certifications, but it's scattered. And I think further efforts have to be put in this area. So we find that there is a gap, and that there is even sometimes inconsistencies or contradictions in which we're putting efforts into following sustainability criteria when we prepare a project, and then we award the tenders to the lowest price. So in EFCA, we decided to support the development of a sustainable procurement toolkit together with European international contractors to help project promoters award their works tenders to the contractors that were actually putting forward more added value on sustainability gains, and we were not just awarding the tenders to the lowest price. And how is the procurement structured in this toolkit? It's a four-stage process, and we are proposing to, first of all, have a first step of pre-qualification that can be a pass-fail criteria to keep it simple. The second step would be an envelope evaluating the quality, sustainability, and technical capacity of contractors. And the overall weight of this first envelope should be of at least 40% if we really want to drive sustainability and quality instead of price. in the award. The third step would be to open the financial envelopes of the tenders that have obtained a minimum score in the first envelope. And the final step is to award the tender or the offer to the most economically advantageous tender, which is applying a formula that gives weights to the technical and the financial envelopes. So the toolkit is responding to the same principle as the World Bank rated criteria for goods, works, and non-consulting services, but it encourages a wider approach for sustainability throughout the project cycle. And when we shared this toolkit with the multilateral development banks, we received two main types of remarks. The first one is, so if we introduce subjectivity in the technical evaluation of the tenders, are we actually increasing the risk of corruption? And our answer to this question is no. The purpose is actually to increase transparency, but the evaluation process has to be done following some recommendations. So you have to be very explicit about the sustainability elements you want to evaluate and make them as objective, measurable, and realistic as possible. You need to appoint an expert to support in the evaluation process, and then invite at least 4 or 5 people from different backgrounds to participate in the panel. So first you evaluate the tenders individually, and then you make a comparison between the different evaluations in a consensus meeting. And you challenge the scores based on arguments. So scoring is only done on the basis of solid arguments. And then you explain the scores to every bidder in comparison to the winning bidder. So indeed, this requires some support to project promoters that don't have the knowledge or the capacity to conduct them on their own. But it does provide measurable sustainability gains. It attracts better competition. It fosters innovation, which is really needed. And it makes the project more likely to get additional private investment. So we think that this is a really important development for project promoters to explore this possibility and to raise the credibility of their projects. The other remark we received was, is it making the projects more expensive? And the answer is yes, it may require some additional upfront investment, but it's very small compared to the substantial cost reductions, efficiency gains, the ESG risk management, and the greater access to finance that you achieve if you analyze and use this approach throughout the project cycle. So it's actually, in our view, the short-term thinking that is actually very expensive for project promoters. So we're suggesting to use procurement as a strategic tool to drive sustainability and to reward the private sector that is committed to delivering tangible results. But we also need stronger commitment in clients. We need to convince project promoters of the benefits of using this approach for a sustainable delivery of projects. We also need to start early in the process, so we cannot start in construction. We have to start upstream and helping project promoters define those sustainability objectives and specifically the quantifiable, measurable, and very clear indicators that can be monitored throughout the infrastructure project cycle and offering reliable and accessible data. And then we also need to make an effort to digitalize projects because sustainability is all about data. And consulting engineers can provide very valuable support to assist in data collection, analyzing data, implementing monitoring systems, digital tools for the design. And we have a major role in promoting sustainability through the digitalization of the implementation so that we translate these high-level objectives into clear metrics. And I'll leave it here and back to you, Manuel.
Thank you, Ines. Okay, it's time. A very interesting, very interesting topic, and all the people attending the webinar will have the opportunity to ask direct questions to your wonderful topic. Our second speaker today is Denis Rizaov. Denis is a senior legal counsel of Granit Construction. He's a construction lawyer with 15 years of experience. He specializes in dispute avoidance through risk and contract management by real-time full life cycle legal project advice and support on international construction projects from tender to realization, as well as dispute resolutions under international arbitration. Denis' experience includes work as an in-house lawyer on construction sites with project managers and engineers, where he learns the construction jargon. He will talk today about procurement process as a risk management tool for clients and the consultant engineer industry. Denis, thank you very much for your time and welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Hello, everybody. We all know that in construction business, work doesn't always go according to plan. But luckily, there are preventive measures you can take in order to minimize the risk. Most of them are available and crucial to be taken from all parties, and especially more by the client before the procurement stage, in which the project risk are identified and the responsibility for their control is formally assigned. Preventive measures can often remove or reduce the effect of the adverse situation that occurred during the realization of the projects. Would you agree that avoiding disputes as early and as quickly as possible is in the best interest of the project itself, as well as everybody involved in, namely the client, the contractor, and the engineer? And all of that begins in the procurement procedure. So how can we achieve this? Of course, by using the procurement process as a risk management tool. A right procurement process helps both parties, the client, the contractor, or the supplier, in order to minimize risk. The World Bank, the European Investment Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and all other major international banks have developed their own procurement guidelines and set of rules that you have to follow to bid for the procurement of a specific project. And if you are working within a culture that seeks to avoid dispute, you will know that most important phase is the procurement, where the risk between the parties are assigned. Firstly, create a fair and balanced distribution of risk between the parties. And if for any reason those agreed risks become imbalanced, and that happens usually on major infrastructure projects, simply apply contract mechanisms which if used, nobody should suffer. In this way, you create a real commercial value to both the employer and the contractor. If the duties, obligation, roles, and responsibilities of all contracting parties are generally, as implied in general conditions, and appropriate to the requirements of the project, this would ensure that appropriate contract is selected for the specific features of the project. It is very important that particular conditions as drafted are clearly and do not change the balance of risk and reward that are provided in the general conditions. And of course, all periods specified in the contracts for all parties to perform their obligations needs to be of reasonable duration. And all of this sounds very good, but it comes the big question: how do we achieve all this? Well, the short answer and straight answer is, of course, with the help of the engineers. You all know that there are many types of engineers in the world with different focuses and expertise, including but not limited to construction, architectural, electrical, machinery, science, biology, neuroscience, biomedicine, nuclear science. But all of them have one thing in common: to create values and improve people's life by building new things. Modern technology is rapidly developing to minimize the possibility of risk and their occurrence of losses. And given the importance of their work, I believe that the professionalism is the key. There is no place for improvisation. The perfect connection between the technology and experience is the future of construction. Licensing and training of administration involved in public procurement to secure the public procurement has met the needs of the international organizations, and the multilateral banks can help professionals to manage projects. Procurement administration delivered by a professional who has been taught through a process of licensing and certification would have better risk control for all involved parties. Few contracts met the requirements of a framework that I have just described shortly, but I'm pleased to say that FIDIC contracts meet all these requirements, and therefore a FIDIC contract culture creates a sound base for procurement to help a fair allocation of future contractual risk worldwide. I would also like to mention that FIDIC has formed an operational group that is currently creating guidelines that will incorporate net zero and net resource requirements within its contracts. This is being done in collaboration with the World Bank, and work is in progress, so watch the space. Thank you, Manuel.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Denis. We are already receiving some questions for you that we will have the opportunity to answer minutes later. Now it's time for our third speaker today. She's Zanda Zarina. She is the Business Development Manager with JurisConsultus, a law firm based in Latvia, which focuses on construction law, especially in FIDIC contract cases. Her experience includes civil construction and real estate management, regional development, and urban economics. Zanda is a member of the FIDIC's Business Practice Leadership Committee. She will highlight the importance of the procurement process to align with the values of consulting engineering industry to ensure this is fair. Welcome and thank you very much for your participation, Zanda.
Yes, thank you, Manuel, for the introduction, and hello to you all. Most consulting engineering companies have values that apply to the people in the company, the clients they work for, and the projects on which they work. And FIDIC's values, for example, I hope you all know, but I will say, is quality, integrity, and sustainability. And any consulting engineering company working to procure services from a client will therefore have an expectation that the client should be respectful of the company's values. And if that respect is not reflected in the procurement process, then we simply all lose out. And I feel more needs to be done to impress upon the clients that the consultants have this expectation. And there are a few points that I would like to emphasize today with you all and in this regard. So first of them is collaboration between the subjects in construction process. We need to understand that it's not only the professional relationship between employer and contractor. There are many more parties involved in the construction process, and it is important because all the things that is done before in the project affects the procurement and also all the other stages later on. So to achieve a productive collaboration between all these parties, it is crucial to get to the point where there's a common understanding between them all. And it will ensure the respectful process to all the parties involved. So, for example, using construction stages defined in the standard 16310 that includes terminology to describe engineering services for buildings and infrastructure and industrial facilities, which state that construction process starts with an initiative stage and ends with the end of life stage, with all those stages being in between them. This could help to achieve the common understanding both in procurement stage and in construction process in general. And another important aspect regarding procurement is that the employer must do the homework. With that, I mean identify appropriate needs and carry out the market research on which to base the terms and conditions for the tenderers. In this process, it's very important to define the needs by identifying and analyzing the risks in the project, and not other way around, how it's often being done in the practice, when we first set out the needs and then analyze the possible risks that come within the project. So there are some practical guides as well to achieve a structural process leading to sensible, fair, and respectful procurement process. For example, a meet criteria developed by EFCA, as it proposes a methodology for clarifying goals and determining quality criteria instead of just focusing on the lowest price. Of course, here it depends on the local jurisdiction and cultural aspects as well that needs to be taken into account. But it's still a very good criteria to look at. And also there's a FIDIC recommended procedures to improve the application of selection of consultants. This document is published in 2023 and basically states that care should be taken to assure the most appropriate consultant is selected and not the cheapest one. It is also important to recognize the potential impacts of requiring potential tenderers or participants to focus on limiting their services or take on the significant risks in order to win just through the appearance of lower costs of the service. Because I guess you all will agree that we understand that the reason a participant stands out based on quality measures may be most likely due to the talent attracted by salaries, benefits, etc. And all of which may add to the cost of services, but ultimately offer also better value. So these are the things to keep in mind, and some pretty basic, I would say, tools to use to achieve the goals of the project regarding quality of the process. And a bit about a practical examples from our region, as it is still a challenge for the post-Soviet region to adapt FIDIC values and terms in a way that it's understandable for all parties involved. From our experience, the problem is usually the lack of positive examples, because the consultants involved are not familiar with the FIDIC values and best practice, and more needs to be done to promote the golden principles among clients and basically all the FIDIC values. And here in Latvia and Baltic states, we have at the moment the largest rail infrastructure project, Rail Baltic. I don't know if you have heard about it, but it's like pretty big for this region. And here we see a lot of problems in planning, financing, and executing the project, with a risk that ill-considered decisions were taken in the pre-project phase, which may have resulted in the procurement process not respecting all the principles I mentioned today previously. So that all leads to not only a significant cost overruns, but also in fundamental changes in the project and public confusion, as well, as this project is of a national importance. And it is very likely that this could have been avoided by timely application of these mentioned principles and best practices. But yeah, in conclusion, I would like to remind you all that FIDIC contracts, nor does the guidelines that I mentioned, does not talk, but people do. So it's crucially important to work on education of the local professionals who work on the projects, adjusting educational programs to the local cultural, traditional, and even bureaucratical, and as well as corruption aspects to achieve not only a high quality result of the project, but also fair, respectful, and the sensible process of achieving it. So I tried very hard to fit in my timetable, so I hope I succeeded. And that's it for me, and I will be happy to answer your questions if some arise later. So thank you.
Thank you, Zanda. Last but not least, okay, today is with us Dilek Macit. Dilek is international procurement advisor, has spent substantial part of her career establishing and leading consultancy services procurement and design and governance of donor-funded technical assistance function at European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, Multilateral Development Bank in London. She has formulated policy, procedures, and operationalized these. Lawyer by profession, she has advised national, regional, and international consultancy associations, private sector, and worked closely in harmonization of consultancy procurement policies and with other multilateral development banks. She will talk today about what's the future for procurement and what should the clients do and not do with this. Thank you and welcome, Dilek.
Thank you, Manuel, and thank you for the previous speakers who have highlighted an awful lot of important points. So what I'm going to try and knit in the next few minutes is how do all of these elements come together? With respect to future procurement, I think procurement has a huge remit in delivering sustainable infrastructure. But it has to be at the table right from the outset. At the moment, or previously rather, procurement came in later after the project formulation in order to deliver the project. And I think it needs to be more strategic partner at the project design. And we need to ensure that it has to have a louder voice at the table. So we need to distinguish two types of procurement. One is the procurement of consultancy services who can be at the table and help project design. And then obviously the procurement of the contractor for the actual construction phase. It needs to be innovative, and it needs to be flexible. Of course, it needs to adhere to the processes and procedures, because the minute it doesn't, then there are complaints and there's misprocurement, et cetera, But those processes have to be fair, transparent, open, etc. And we all know that. That goes without saying. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is the fact that the more strategic role the procurement can play in delivering sustainable infrastructure. And for that, we need to look at the whole project delivery mechanism. And the project delivery mechanism often starts, okay, it's the client's idea, it's the client's project, but MDBs as financiers of these very large infrastructure projects play an awful lot of a big role in influencing the design by contracting the consultants, by building in the whole ESG as an overlay into the infrastructure project that needs to be delivered. And there are therefore many external factors, including the laws of the country, the conditions of the country, the corruption, and we can't avoid those. When we look at the way the MDBs have formulated and implement their policies on procurement as well as the project delivery. But then there's also the internal factors that affect project delivery, and that is the capacity of the clients. And we have to be realistic on that and try and knit all aspects of these factors into a proper strategy, but in that it has to have elements of flexibility to avoid the risks that Denis has talked about throughout the project lifecycle, to take care of the issues that Zanda mentioned, etc. So what are we looking for? We're looking for an informed client. And what is an informed client? I mean, we've all heard the term, and in my view, informed client basically does its own gap analysis in a complex project delivery and understands its own capability and capacity, and also where it's lacking in relation to the tasks it faces. It is effective in gaining and using the knowledge, using knowledge to make informed decisions. And this is where professionals and consulting engineers as experts in the delivery of those type of projects come in. In other words, it buys in the expertise. The client needs to be efficient in organizing itself for the task and have proper governance mechanisms, including way of escalating how it takes decisions, how it holds its staff accountable, and how it manages risks. And then the client needs to also show a degree of flexibility to be able to adapt to the demands of the project. What we also need to do is encourage the clients or even not force them, but often with MDB financing, because they have the environmental and sustainability policies that need to be delivered as part of the project, get them to appreciate the elements of ESG that needs to be inbuilt into the project delivery. And with that, we need to build the capacity of the client. Now, what the MDBs can do in this sphere, or other financiers, and this is where my experience with donor-funded technical assistance comes in, is that often these are provided on a grant basis, so that the consultants are there at the project right from the outset, on a grant basis, providing the client the advice it needs. These are incentives to get them to do better project formulation and better project delivery, to meet the sustainability criteria. So integrating all of these is not easy. Every project is different, and every project requirements, therefore, are different. But holding the client's hand through capacity building in parallel to project delivery has been tried and tested many times in the past. And I think that it's still a valuable assistance to provide. And I think that there is no backing away from delivering sustainable projects. I just hope that when times get tough economically, or when there's conflict, we have all these terms like Green Deal and Build Back Better, but we collectively, whether it's the financiers, whether it's the consultants, whether it's the tenderers or the contractors, all stick to, and in particular the politicians as well, because often affordability of the client comes from what is available on a project budget. So this is all the best practice that I could advocate. And for consultants, for many, many years, we have been using proper evaluation criteria to measure quality or qualifications, and also how they would deliver their advice, the methodology, the innovation, their ideas. And that is what I would call intellectual evaluation. In other words, intellectual element of a proposal. And what I think that the World Bank rated criteria and what the toolkit is doing is transferring those elements into what the contractors should now be evaluated on, as well as goods and non-consulting services. And with that, I hand over to Manuel. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, the four speakers, for your presentations, for your topics. It's time, I think, to summarize before our Q&A session, to summarize a little bit. I'm not going to summarize each of you, because you had a very narrow time to express the ideas. But globally, what I can say is that all of you has highlighted words like balance, to use the fairness, balance of risk, the connection between the procurement and the contract, the connection between the project and the project delivery, to have a respectful process, to launch educational programs for the clients, to be adapted to the local jurisdiction, to encourage the clients to be formed, to create capacity building in the clients, to push for the intellectual evaluation and avoid the cheaper buying. In general terms, I think that all of you in the time has highlighted the focus on the clients. I think that we all have the responsibility here in the industry to look for an informed client and to help the clients to be informed at the same time. And don't rest in this process, to insist that we deserve to have this fair procurement process, and we need to be involved. And I think that is an unanimous voice from the industry in that way. And I think that before our Q&A session, we have our second poll question. And after that, we can go through the questions coming from our attendees. This is our second poll question. It's based on your experience. Do you believe that the procurement process of your key clients is appropriate and effectively contributes to selecting the most suitable consultancy firm? After what you have listened from our speakers, do you think that your clients usually follow or reach the targets and the topics that our speaker has talked about? Here you have the possibilities to answer the question. And after the key results, we can go through the Q&A session. We had some very interesting questions coming from our attendees, and we can start once that we have. Okay, sometimes, always very well balanced, but most of the time you think that are you think that are good treated by your clients here. Thank you very much for everybody, to everybody for your participation. Then I think that we can go for the Q&A session. We have several questions coming from you. Thank you very much. I'm going to read some of them. Okay, the first one is for Denis. Denis, one of our attendees are asking if you can please share some of the problems or issues that you mentioned in your practice, which have you met during your procurement process. He or she, I don't know, expressed that in the experience he or she has, most of the risks are assigned to the contractor from the clients, and one side contract is quite often in practice, but could cause many problems after the contract is signed. What are your thoughts about this one side contract, and if you have faced challenges and problems during your career on that?
Thank you for the question, Manuel. I was hoping to get that question. I'm lucky. As Dilek said, I couldn't agree more with her that every project is a different story and specific story, especially in construction. And every day something new happens. And this is one of the reasons why I love construction and my job. It's never boring. I have faced a lot of issues in the procurement process. Most of them I can mention that missing documents, missing geotechnical investigation reports, missing information in the employer's requirements data. But from all, even from bad examples, we can learn and take know-how and positive examples. That I believe it's crucial to stress that all parties involved in the procurement should be transparent, and all the works, specification and designs, geotechnical investigation works, all the informations should be provided to the tenderees in the procurement procedure, because then the chances to select the most successful bidder and deliver the project on time and budget are good. Of course, I see procurement as building a foundation, a structure, a main structure, a skeleton for project, the real skeleton of the project. And if you make it solid and right from the beginning, then the chances are very good that the project will go smoothly and within the plan. Of course, issues happen and problems, especially during the realization of the project. in that time, if you have a good and balanced contract and not one-sided contract, then your chances to solve the problems are very good because the risk and the responsibilities can be identified very quickly. So at the end, the result from the question is what will happen if the risk are more on the contractor side? Well, there is a rule that the risk should be given to the party that is most capable to resolve the risk, to manage the risk. Then my short answer is that the price would be higher. But if you have one-sided contract, not enough documents provided in the procurement procedure, and not enough time for the tenderers to review them and estimate them and make a risk assessment, then I believe you're heading on a highway to arbitration where the result will be loss of time and money instead of finishing the project on time and within the budget. That's why I said that for me, procurement is where the real foundation of a project is built. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis. Here we have another attendee who is asking us to go directly to the point and moving from the values to the examples. Then let me ask Ines, please, I'm aware that you know, I don't know, tens and tens of potential cases and ideas about procurement examples of good practice. Could you share with us at least one or two examples of clients that you think are doing the things well? You don't need to, of course, name the client, but at least the procedure that you think that could be good for other clients to do, examples of methodologies or moving from the values to the key examples.
Okay, thank you, Manuel. Yes, so we hear a lot about the commitment to climate change mitigation and adaptation, and the commitment, for example, to circular economy. Well, this has to be translated into an objective of the project with certain indicators of how this is being rolled out in the ground. So you might want to, as an objective related to the greening of the infrastructure, you might want to lower the emissions, reduce waste, increase the use of recycled materials or local materials, increase the use of renewable energy sources, or the treatment of construction materials. So this has to be translated into having a life cycle analysis at the beginning of the project so that you're not just tackling one phase of the project, but really having the full view. And then you might need to, analyze the emissions and do some energy efficiency studies and see how what the local energy sources are. And that way you are able to introduce these improvements and let the private sector come in and compete on these, and probably add some capacity building and training to the project so that it can be increasingly managed locally. And what we see is that, for example, in terms of emissions, most of the emissions can be saved in the operation and maintenance phase. So you really need to have that full project cycle in mind to be able to contribute significantly to the agenda. And then, of course, when it comes to materials, then you look more into the construction. And I saw one of the questions in the chat, how does digitalization help in this regard? Well, if you have a digital support for the design, all of these elements can be introduced and actually have an impact on the design alternative that is chosen, and maybe even think about having them as KPIs to monitor throughout the project cycle. If you take, for example, another criteria related to sustainability, you want to improve safety and security and inclusion with your project. Well, then you have to introduce high standard health and safety considerations, maybe inclusive design options. And then, of course, you have to consider that you're going to have to train local staff and hire locally to be able to improve the knowledge of the local workforce. And another example would be improving transparency and management capacity for the projects. And it is an objective in itself to improve the data collection of the project, the data management, introducing digital design tools, new technologies for decision-making. And this is something that you can do upstream and that would affect all of the procurement that is carried out throughout the project, and then have the private sector come in with the solutions. And this will not be achieved if you just award the contract to the lowest price. So this is why these criteria need to be embedded in the evaluation and have at least 40% of the weight, because if it's less than that, we see that in the end, it's the price coming up as the most relevant factor. So if we really want the private sector to compete and to bring real value and innovation in these aspects, we need to start using quality as a main element and move away from price. Back to you,
Ines. Thank you very much. I have here a question for Zanda, but I think that could be shared for everybody and say, okay, we know, and some studies says that actually client is the #1 reason for causing delays in procurement. Then it's clear that we have good ideas to motivate them, but how can we motivate the clients to do that? Okay, then Zanda, I don't know if you are ready to answer this very complex question, because everybody wants to influence the client, and a few of us can do it. But if anybody can add anything, Zanda, what do you think? What's your ideas to motivate the clients to move into these values that we are sharing today?
Well, it's actually, the answer is super simple, but very, very hard to put into practice, because the client needs to be educated, but not doing this homework that I mentioned also in my presentation, the homework of setting appropriate these criteria that increases the risks, which translate into extra costs, time extensions, and also disputes. So it's super easy to understand this idea that if we don't do this homework, we end up with higher costs and lower quality product at the end of the process. So basically, the answer is to educate the client.
And don't give up. Never give up with that. Never. Okay, thank you very much, Zanda. Ines, I have tons of questions for you. The second one is related to the criteria that you develop and toolkit that you describe in your time. The question is, why shouldn't the client include the detailed list of requirements for sustainability goal? Instead, the contractor suggests them. Could this generate some, disalignment if several contractors adding different things and could be difficult to evaluate? Or how is the toolkit trying to manage this?
Well, we think that the criteria has to be geared by the client. And then we speak again about the well-informed client and the knowledgeable client, because they have to know and define early on what are the sustainability objectives they really want to tackle with the project. So they have to define which elements they're pursuing and which are going to be the indicators that they want to follow. It shouldn't be up for each contractor to define what sustainability element it will improve. I think it is up to the promoter to let's say put the project in front of the market in terms of what sustainability gains it wants to see rolled out. And that might be linked to the financing of the project. So there might be some incentives to deliver on certain sustainability elements because there is the financing behind it that will require to check and verify those sustainability gains. And I think this is going to be more and more the trend in which the financing is going to push project promoters to deliver more on this regard. They're going to push us as private contractors and consultants to compete and to deliver more solutions in that respect. And then, of course, we have the contracts that are going to have to make sure that the risk is balanced in the implementation. But yes, I think this is really going to be the way that we will see projects evolve and tenders evolve in the future.
Thank you, Ines. Dilek, a question for you here coming from some of our attendees. How should evaluation panels be composed? Can you please give some examples of that? How's your opinion about these panels, evaluation panel composition?
Thank you. Well, the simple terms are that the members of the evaluation panel should be qualified and competent. Now, these are easy words to articulate, but what does it mean? I have seen evaluation panels on the part of the project promoter be staffed by senior people just because they're important. Everybody wanted to be on an evaluation panel if it was a major tender that was going to be evaluated, just because it was kudos because of the position that they held. And I would give that as a bad example. I would also give a bad example of in a port project whereby pretty much everybody that was on the evaluation panel were really junior staff who didn't know what they were really evaluating. So to have the experience and expertise in reading and understanding what those proposals or those tenders mean is really, really important. And again, I think it was Zanda who mentioned it, that if you don't have that knowledge, then you have an expert to assist the panel. That's the qualified and competent in reading and understanding, so you can evaluate what is in front of you. The second thing is obviously to have integrity and without being influenced. And again, we would say staff should be of similar qualifications and experience, because if you have seniors and juniors, seniors can quite easily influence the juniors. The third aspect that I would say is that ensure that they do have a degree of independence. I have seen evaluation panels who were pretty frightened of politicians, if I could say, in the award of tenders, and they're looking to do the right thing. Now, I'm just giving you all the bad examples of what not should happen in the composition of an evaluation panel. And lastly, in order for it to be a fair evaluation and for it to be a transparent evaluation, those grids, the evaluation grids and the scoring criteria have to be pretty well thought through. And so that you can have somebody who's a very generous scorer versus somebody who's really mean in its scoring. And at least they're in strict margins so that there is a comparison of like for like. And this is where procurement becomes fair. And this is when you define whether it's the sustainability criteria or the data points that need to be addressed in the project delivery into narrow margins and give a score to that. And that's where it can stand up to challenge. So this is what I would say is the ideal evaluation panel. And then looking at it from the bidder's perspective, I would say, don't blind them with science. In other words, don't put your entire project in the proposal so that you're trying to impress as consultants or as contractors, and there is so much terminology in that it basically puts off people. And I would summarize by giving a good example of a proposal that I came across many, many years ago in my career, which was the shortest one, which was double-spaced in its format. And it was really simple English, because if we're looking at international projects, often English is not the first language of these evaluation panels. So trying to impress them with technical jargon, if they're not experts in that, is only going to do disservice to it, because people would just switch off. So these are the sort of few tips on my side.
Thank you, Dilek. Very useful. Thank you very much. Next questions. I have a couple of questions here for Denis, and I'm going to link both. The first one talk about the risk management, because the question is, can a contractor solely rely on the information provided by the employer to mitigate a risk, or should run its own due diligence? I guess the answer, of course, but let me link with the second one, which is, okay, Denis, considering the importance of mitigating risk, minimizing risk and managing responsibilities in the procurement, how do the licensing and certification support professionals in this regard? Then let us know something about the mitigation risk coming from the contractor or consultancy, and the addition about how the licensing and certification can help all this process. Denis.
Thank you for the question, Manuel, for both questions. Actually, I strongly believe they are very, very much connected, because, of course, a contractor should do its own due diligence, because, as we all agreed, the clients and the employers needs to be trained and educated in order to be able to provide the best procurement procedures and all the necessary documents included, so that in order to attract the best contractors to bid and to participate in the procurement procedure, and to give them more to bid with the more and more realistic price. And one way to do that is to train the professionals and the public administration that are involved in the procurement procedure through either certification or licensing, in order to be able to apply a culture to avoid disputes and risk, and to promote delivery of the project within time and on the budget. Because at the end of the day, that's their the cost. The clients are publishing tender in order to get something, and they're paying for that. They're making a procurement procedure for some infrastructural project to be built, highway, railway, for the benefit of the human being. And for that, they are paying. And if they give all the necessary documents in right, then they will attract the best contractors, and they will get the more realistic price. And if they don't have one-sided contract, then the possibility of disputes will be less. And that's why I believe that licensing and certification would ease the process of procurement, using procurement as a tool for risk management, firstly by the clients in the tendering procedure, with bringing all the necessary documents that are necessary to be bring in the tender procedure, and then by the contractors who are reviewing and making their own risk assessment in the tendering procedure, asking clarification, providing questions, and all of that needs to be transparent and followed by the multilateral development bank procurement rules and guidelines. And we must not forget the applicable laws of the country where the procurement is held. And if you have all of that, and if you have engaged the right professional team of the engineer, of lawyers and engineers, then I believe that the chances to get the project on time and within the budget are very good. Otherwise, the chances are very good you end up on DAB or arbitration.
Thank you, Denis. We have here a question. It's not for any specific speaker. Then I will take by myself, and I will let the speakers rest for a couple of minutes. How effective a procurement platform in administrating and managing procurement process tasks especially managing risk and avoid any disputes that may rise during the execution of the contract? Or what advice can you give to clients using these platforms to provide a better results? Or do you think a traditional way of procurement is better to compare to using a platform or e-procurement? Let me answer that. I think that the platforms are necessary to manage and increase the level of transparency, at least in the examples that I know with the clients. All these platforms are helping to everybody is connected and informed and the transparency. However, platforms are just a tool. Here we have talked about informed clients, the people who is the panelists who are evaluating the projects, the criteria to evaluate it. All these things has to be managed by people. Then yes, platforms are a tool, but are not by themselves are the answer. Okay, it's better for some things, but behind these platforms, the client has to be informed, fair, well managed, and this is always to be in the platform or with the, let's say, traditional way that our attendee was mentioned. Then, yes, I think that we are in favor of platforms to help transparency, but no is not the complete answer to the procurement issues. I have here another one for Dilek. What advice can you give for those who are involved in procurement tasks in terms of managing corruption and conflict of interest and maintain the ethical standards of the professions?
Thank you, Manuel. That's a tough one. The minute the corruption word comes into it, it's always a very, very delicate balance. I can again talk about a spectrum of examples that we've had in our career, but when I was talking about the informed client and the accountability mechanism or a good governance structure, this is where a junior or a procurement professional can do its job, and if it's under the influence of a particular bidder, can then escalate. Now, what happens when at the corruption's at the escalated stage, which is the tricky one? And there, again, it depends on who the financier is. And I'm looking at, for example, a public promoter which is, say, prone to corruption. And we've had that. We've had some pretty influential bidders, and we've had some clients who are not necessarily very transparent. Now, what you can do in those sort of projects is either look who the financier is, and if it is an MDB, the MDBs have very, very strict policies on that, and have the MDB come in order to assist the issue, because it could cancel the financing. In an example that I would give, which happened in my career, is that I was told that number 2 was to be awarded the contract, and I hadn't even seen the evaluation report yet. And so I stayed silent. And when we realized that there was something going on that was untoward, we tried to raise that with the client. The client was obviously prone to corruption, so we had to go within the government structure and raise it independently in a very subtle way in order to rein the whole thing in and bring it back to proper procurement. Otherwise, we had to restart the whole procurement process again. But the contract was not awarded to number 2. But again, the whole whistleblowing mechanisms or ability to report, independent accountability mechanisms are all there for a reason, and they should be utilized. What I would also say in that is that you can also build into the project different types of checks and balances to pick up on these. And one example I would give is that in the PPPs of Turkish hospitals, which was very big projects in Turkey, what we had was value for money assignments, where it was conducted by a completely independent consultancy firm in order to report to the parliament in ensuring that the consultants selected and the whole, not the consultants, the tender that won and that would deliver these would do it in accordance with the relative criteria, and the taxpayer would get value for money in these hospitals. So I can talk a lot about this area, but there is no magic bullet on that, I'm afraid. And integrity has to be at the heart of it, but it's a long slog.
Thank you very much, Dilek. Zanda, one question for you here. Well, really is to all the panelists, but I'm sending to you their role. Could you share with us some strategies, okay, to try to educate the clients in some sense to the importance of adhering to best practice in procurement? Do you have any a strategy to go to them and talk to them about how to do the things better?
Well, in our experience, usually we try to educate these people by showing the numbers of costs that is like being bigger than it has to be, just because the client is not educated enough, and emphasize that the very first thing to do when starting the construction process is make sure you understand everything you don't understand, and then trying to find answers before moving on to the next stage. Plus, also use the professional local experts, and in this cocktail comes in this education, and then everything happens better.
Thank you, Zanda. To all panelists, a couple, 2 or 3 attendees are asking for good examples, okay? I think that some of us put bad examples here. You talk about one project, Zanda, a specific project. I don't know if any of our panelists have a good example of good administration, good client, or good project that really are managing or managed the procurement in a good way, and fairness and all the values that we are saying with the attendees. I don't know, Ines, Denis, Dilek, if you have any potential good example of this procurement grade matrix or process.
Manuel, I can share some experiences that we're seeing with sustainable procurement in Europe. And the feedback we receive is that in certain countries, they're applying meat, and they're applying meat not just for quality, but for sustainability gains in the project. So it's one of the critical factors. And what we have learned is that the reports that were prepared by the panel were actually extremely helpful for the companies, because it was giving them the feedback on how to help them improve their tenders and be more performant less in the following procurement. So the fact of having this relationship with an informed client and trying to add value and being evaluated on that with solid arguments actually is very encouraging for good firms that are getting the good arguments in reply to their tenders. So it creates, instead of a vicious circle, a virtuous circle in which good companies want to tender for those clients, and they're actually using the evaluation reports to introduce important improvements in their business.
Thank you very much, Ines. I have a question for Mr. Prasad now. and it seems an easy one. I will take notes if the answer is right. Is how to improve the delays in public projects in development works. Is there any possible way to deal this issue in the contract phase to counter the delay in later stages? Easy question.
Very easy, Manuel. Thank you for that. And whoever's asked that. Well, I think one practice that we've recently seen clients adopt in developing economies, especially in India. One of the challenges that we have a lot in our projects here is basically access to site in a timely manner. And this leads to, delays in contracts and subsequently leads down to claims and procurement, other related issues. So what we've been doing here is now that unless I think 90% of the site is clear and cannot be handed over to the contract cannot begin. So what the government has stipulated is that only once you have a clear site where there's no land acquisition issues, utilities have been shifted, and you can hand over 80 or 90% of the site to the contractor, only then will the work begin. And I've found this very effective because you're having lesser claims coming forward from the contractor with regard to extension of time, time delays, and so on and so forth. So I think the right education of the client in timely handing over of the site after clearing the site and giving him a clear access to site really goes a long way in getting a timely output on the project.
Thank you. Dennis, here we have an attendee that said, there are clients who amend FIDIC forms during bid stage for their interest, which sometimes resulted to disputes during execution if not drafted properly, of course. What advice can you give to your client on this kind of a scenario?
The short answer would be follow the golden rules of FIDIC. One of them says don't amend the particular conditions that will be sustainably amend the risk and allocation and the balance of risk and reward between the parties. Actually, the particular condition should be a tool to amend, to make the necessary amendments of the general conditions that are necessary and required by the applicable law of the project. Because the FIDIC contracts, for instance, have, and I think all the infrastructure projects have a general rule on each project to apply the laws of the country where the project has been built. So if you heavily amend the particular conditions and change the balance of the risk on the project, then you can expect disputes to arise. And we are talking again about one-side contract. And in the procurement procedure, you would expect a lot of questions by the contractors and asking for clarification. And again, the price from the bidders will be much higher because the balance of the risk that should be usual will be imbalanced. And again, we are on the road to nowhere. Instead of that, if you balance the particular condition in accordance with the guidelines, the multilateral development banks and the procurement rules and the applicable laws in order to rectify them into the public procurement and inform the tenders what are they, then I think then you're using them as a right tool in the procurement procedure. Otherwise, I would not advise any client to make any other amendments that I mentioned now.
Thank you very much. I think that we have covered most of the topics. I haven't read all the questions, but I think that summarizing are more or less all the topics. There are a few one related to, for example, unexpected conditions that could be done. I don't know, Dennis, if you can complete. Here is someone who say, okay, during the procurement phase, the client, of course, is responsible to put all the detailed design, everything that they have at this time. But what's going on if
If something new happened, it should be clarified and administered in accordance with the tender procedure. For instance, if a new term has been published on a clarification meeting or through a question, then an amendment to the tendering documentation should be issued and circulate to all the tenderees, so everybody should be aware what has been going on. That's the usual way how the thing should be done. And otherwise, I would not suggest sending emails or another communication that would not be appropriate from the known international practice.
Thank you very much, Denis. Again, I think that we have covered almost, if not all, the topics that the attendees have shared with us during the questions. I have to thank you, all of you, for the answers, and go through, I think that Prasan to close the webinar in some way.
Well, thank you, Manuel, and thank you to all the speakers. And I think I'd like to say that this is a very informative and a very engaging webinar. I personally learned a lot about procurement and the way forward, and I hope those who've attended have also benefited from attending the webinar. And I think I'd like to once again thank Bentley Systems for their support of the FIDIC webinar series. And we'd like to also invite you all to attend the next FIDIC webinar, which is coming up in 2 weeks' time, which was brought to us by FIDIC's Financial Institutions Committee on the 27th of February regarding de-risking and leveraging infrastructure investment and helping the private sector fill the funding gap. Also currently at FIDIC, we are looking at developing our next strategic plan and for the period 2025 to 2029. And I'd like to call upon each one of you who are invested with us as stakeholders of FIDIC to kindly undertake a survey, which is being sent by email by the Secretariat. And I think the link is also going to be put up in the chat box here. We'd like you to kindly fill in the survey. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes, but we would like to hear your responses, which will help us put together the plan for FIDIC for our combined future course of action going forward. It will take only about 15 minutes of your time, but it is very important to us. So please do make an effort to fill that up. And once again, thank you to all the attendees for their questions, which were very interesting and engaging. And I'd like to continue to encourage everyone to participate in more and more FIDIC activities. And thank you for your participation once again. Thank you very much, everyone.